Hi, I'm Ian, and this is Bagelian Dialectics. What are Bagelian Dialectics? Well,
Bagelian dialectics are a play on the word Hegelian dialectics. Hegelian dialectics are a method of historical thinking developed by the philosopher Johann Gottlieb Fichte in the late 1700s. Although Hegel's work came after Fichte's, and although Hegel never explicitly outlined the dialectical approach, they're remembered as Hegelian dialectics because of the work that he did building on what Fichte created, and due to the sheer influence his work would have on later thinkers, such as the dialectical materialism of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Hegelian dialectics involve a motion between ideas. In any system, there is an initial idea or state, known as a thesis. This thesis has contradictions inherent within itself, which cause it to be unstable. These contradictions generate the antithesis, which is the culmination of all the problems and inconsistencies within the idea. By combining the thesis with the antithesis, we achieve something new, known as the synthesis, wherein the best parts of the thesis and the antithesis are combined, and some of the inherent contradictions within the thesis are gone. This process repeats infinitely as time goes on. The synthesis becomes itself a new thesis, and the cycle repeats. Hegel believes that this cycle will end with a final synthesis, free of contradictions, but we'll go into more detail on that later, as well as discussing some examples of Hegelian dialectics in the real world. For now, we'll go with my favorite example of the Hegelian dialectic, the Bagelian dialectic, the synthesis of starchy and sweet, where bread meets chocolate. So come with me, and let's get cooking. To begin the dialectical process, we'll of course need the bready thesis, the bagel, or in this case donut, as in the original picture it appears to be depicting a donut instead of a bagel. I don't know who in their right mind would put chocolate on a bagel, but regardless, we're going to be making a donut today, and the first step for that is mixing our dry ingredients. Now we microwave our butter. My microwave took about 30 seconds. Yours may take more or less depending on its power. Now we take our butter and pour it into the dry ingredients while stirring constantly until clumps form. Now we beat our egg until it's smooth. And we add the egg and the milk to the dry ingredients, mixing until a shaggy dough is formed. This is also the stage where I added some vanilla extract. At this point, you'll have this ball of really sticky, wet dough. And what you want to do is you want to put some parchment paper out and you want to put Like literally just tons of flour. You want to flour everything. You want to flour your hands, you want to flour the table, you want to flour the parchment paper. I didn't put nearly enough flour in this thing, and you're going to see what happens. I needed to get more out like midway through. I kept adding flour. You should add literally like 8 to 10 times what I thought I needed. I needed way more than that. And then, just knead the dough, work it with your hands, develop some gluten, and, just work it. Just work it. And as you can see here, this is what you want it to end up looking like. Just a nice smooth ball of dough that can be described as nothing else other than silky. And now that we have a nice little ball of dough, you can see here we've got a baking sheet with flour, heavily floured, floured rolling pin, and a second baking sheet for cutting, and our oil, about a quart of vegetable oil. We got it 350 degrees, and a cooling rack all set up to go. Here we're going to roll the dough out into a nice, about 1/2 inch thick sheet, perfect size for cutting. And then we're going to be using a little biscuit cutter that I found and a little egg holder that I found to cut the holes. Obviously, if you have like more specific tools for this job, then those would be nice, but really you can work with anything that you have that's about the right size. I think the egg holders I used for the center hole were maybe a little bit big, leaving the donuts with a little bit too big of a hole, but overall, really happy with the size. Now we're cutting out the donuts. Here you can see with the extra we made some little happy donut holes. Now it's time for the most dangerous and exciting part of all. Drop those suckers into your pot of hot oil and let them rip. And then start to immediately panic when a burning smell goes through your kitchen. Yeah, as it turns out, don't do what I do. Measure the temperature of your oil, because I thought that it would, like, I could just eyeball it, and, I roughly knew what 350 degrees felt like. I had no clue what 350 degrees felt like. This first batch of donuts just immediately turned into a blackened husk. And here you can see my reaction as I take out my thermometer and read a nice, balmy 550 degrees on it. You can really just see those blackened husk of dead donuts in the distance, just stillborn, unborn donuts that never saw the light of day. So now that your pot is at the proper 350 degrees after waiting a couple minutes, now you can drop your donuts in, and make sure that you're careful. Make sure you sort of drape them in. You don't want to just drop them in. Dropping them can lead to splashing. But even more than that, it can just make the donuts deformed. And unfortunately, earlier I had one which was too skinny. I couldn't get the right grip on it. The first one I put in the first batch was kind of plinked in there. But just try and hold good control of them as you drop them in. So as you can see, these actually turned out really, really well in the second batch. Let's cut to the live feed and see my reaction to eating one by itself.
So now we're going to try the donut. Just a plain donut, our stand-in for the bagel in the Bagelian Dialectic, and see how it turned out. Pretty fluffy on the inside. It's all cooked. It's got this nice golden finish, and it actually tastes really, really good just on its own. Like a sweetbread kind of taste. I almost compare it to like a sugar cookie. I mean, obviously you've had cake donuts before, but it's interesting. This is like just the cake donuts, nothing added. Because usually you buy these and there's like peanut butter or sprinkles or chocolate or whatever. And this is just the, oh, hey there. Oh, she wants that donut. No donuts for you, Scarlet. Yeah, surprisingly good.
But it can always be better. Now that we have our base, our thesis, the donut by itself, the donut in itself, we have to ask ourselves, what are the contradictions inherent within this piece of food? And the answer to that is that it lacks a certain sweetness, it lacks a punch, it lacks a character. It is nourishing, to be sure, and it is sweet, but it lacks a luxury to it, a luxury that can be provided only by perhaps an addition, perhaps a antithesis, something without substance but with greater sweetness. For that, we will use chocolate glaze. And the way that we do that is we mix 2 tablespoons of cocoa, 1.5 cups of powdered sugar, 2 tablespoons of water, some salt, mix it all together. Then we put all that good stuff in a bowl and we dunk them. And so the Bagelian dialectic is complete. Let's cut to the live feed and see what it tastes like.
Okay, and now the donuts are done. They're ready. Put them in the freezer for a little bit just so the glaze would firm up a little. And here it is, the end of the Bagelian dialectic. Absolute donut. In all seriousness, this looks very good. I'm very excited to eat this. I mean, yeah, tastes freaking great. It's got chocolate on top. That's our, that's the antithesis off the basis, the thesis of this cake donut base. It's got everything. It's a synthesis of everything, of two distinct, contradictory flavors, but yet they come together to form something far greater. Because honestly, I wouldn't want to eat chocolate sauce by itself, and those donuts were okay, but hey, they're a lot better with chocolate on them. So here we go. This is it. This is the synthesis of the Bagelian dialectic. This is absolute donut.
So what do I mean when I say absolute donut? I'm referring to a notion in Hegel's work he calls absolute knowing. Absolute knowing is the state which humanity will be in when we reach the final synthesis. As in, we'll be in a state with absolutely no contradictions. Hegel never ventures a guess for what absolute knowing will look like practically speaking, but we can assume it entails universal peace, love, an end of suffering, and a complete and total understanding of the universe. Interestingly, this shares more than some similarities with the religious notion of the beatific vision, where in after Judgment Day, several Abrahamic faiths believe that they will ascend to meet God and see his face, granting them absolute knowledge of everything in the universe, as well as eternal peace and happiness. Finally, because I realized I forgot to mention this earlier in the video, I'll talk about some practical examples of dialectics in history. One example of a dialectical process which I would like to pay particular attention to is in light of the Bagelian dialectic is the fall of the Soviet Union. Like the donut, communism provides basic nourishment without the intense sweetness found in free market capitalism, which one could compare to the chocolate sauce. Perhaps it would be a better analogy if the donut were made without sugar, but the point still stands. In the 1980s, the Soviet world found itself at a crossroads between the old way of doing things, communism, offering a thesis, while the new way of doing things, free market capitalism, presented an antithesis. These two ideas reconciled to create the former Soviet world of today. This also played out in America during the 1700s. The thesis was of king and empire, and was seen as having flaws. There were contradictions in the form of an upset American ruling class, unhappy with taxation and rule. When the antithesis of independence came to bear, the dialectical process played out, as it often does, in the form of war. And from the ashes arose a new way of doing things, the way that persists to this day. The dialectic never ends. It's continuously in motion. It is simply a question of what the thesis is and what the antithesis will be. Bear in mind that it is not always as simple as the structure of a thing changing. Perhaps the synthesis is greater control, a tendency towards a more extreme, more sustainable version of the thesis. No one can predict these things, but one thing is sure. When Fichte and Hegel chose to begin seeing the history of humanity through the lens of the dialectic, we gained an invaluable analytic tool, one which is still applicable to this day.